Yeah. That's good. It's I'm in Virginia and it's gotten pretty chilly down here in the morning. So what like you're on the western side, over on the western side of New York mountains?
No, we're south. I'm about 40 miles north of New York City.
I got you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, I'm with you now. Um we had traveled up through uh Binghamton and then over to
Yep.
Cooperstown and through that little track through there, and we never made it into the city. We made a little road trip up through and ended up in Maine and then come back down. But that's
You
cool, man.
you
Pretty
didn't miss
area.
you didn't miss much. That's the part of New York to visit.
Yeah, that's what because I was when you I have that habit of when you say New York, you automatically assimilate it with the city. And New
Right.
Jersey, for me, New Jersey was the same way. When I rolled through there, I was like, it was like being in home. Like I grew up rural, right? So it was like being down here, and so the same thing. I really had to. I re-educated myself, and now I have a different perspective when I tell people to go visit New York. I'm like, oh man, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, anything north of, I mean, where I live is actually still pretty. They call it rural. But it's not really. There's more spaces between houses, but you're still pretty much on top of each other. Where we have our second house is actually up in the Catskills,
Yeah.
and that is gorgeous. Everybody up there, we have a small plot of land. We're around 2 acres, and most people I know have 10 to 20. My brother-in-law has like 70 some odd acres, so a lot, very rural, very a lot of land.
Yeah, that's really neat because it's similar down here to where I think just the dollar goes a little further to
Hmm.
where you're able to own a little more land with your fun spot or your hunting spot or whatever that it might be there. We haven't ventured out into that yet. We generally I've been reluctant to just invest in anything secondary for us because we like to travel. Like I don't want anything I
Right.
got to go to that takes away that time because we like to stay on the road, man.
Well, I got 3 years left in law enforcement, and we're
Yeah.
gonna sell. We're gonna sell this house down here, and we're gonna move to the mountains, and that's gonna be base of operations. But no, my wife and I, especially as we move towards retirement and kind of that next phase of life, no, we want to travel. We want to see the rest of the country. We want to start, hitting the international scene and actually going places. So no, we want to do a ton of traveling as soon as I don't have anything tethering me to a specific area.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Let me tell everybody who I'm working with today on the Jeff Robertson Show, because you kind of teed us up there, law enforcement officer. But I'm sitting down with someone who knows what it means to live a life of structure, service, and purpose. After 2 decades of law enforcement, Rodney Carpenter is trading police reports for plot twists as he steps into a brand new chapter as a mystery writer. And this is why I was reading about you, and we're going to talk about discipline, loss, creativity, and how one moment can change your direction. And former police officers, well,
Okay.
did not put in as much time as you, and to no means, but total on the public safety. When I started when I was a kid, so about 20 years or so invested in that's what I probably am close to. But for you and the interesting part was just how you made that switch into your writing, which I think is I get people on my show, Rodney, all the time, and they're like, "Man, we ought to write a book someday." Or every cop, there's not very like there's the stories that we stack. Me and my friends will get together, we'll tell stories, and people, wife or anybody else will be like, "Oh, you guys ought to write a book," and it's easier said than done. And
Oh,
I think it was,
absolutely.
yeah, I think that was part of it. But man, thank you for being with me and giving me the chance and my audience the chance to get to know you and learn more about your work, dude.
I appreciate the opportunity also, Jeff.
Um, so 20 years in law enforcement. At what point in time did you decide you were going to start writing, and what did that first story idea come to you?
So just backtrack a little bit. I guess technically a writer first. I grew up. I was always creative. I was the kid playing in the woods. We're talking about rural kind of growing up. I'd play in the woods, and I made up all sorts of different things over the years. In high school and college, I was a writer. I was an English major in college. I was gonna be a lawyer at some point, and that kind of veered off to a degree. So I was a writer first. And what I really found was at that point, I didn't have anything to say. I didn't have anything to write. And I didn't have real life experience. So fast forward, about 3.5 years ago, it was May of 2022. And at that point, I'd been a sergeant, a first line supervisor for about 7 years, going on, I think going on 7 years at that point. So I was working, I spent the first half of that time as a sergeant working midnights. And then the second half of it, I spent working the afternoon shift. So this particular day, I was actually working a double. I worked my afternoon shift into an overnight shift. So it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, some 11 hours in, and I was dragging. It was a Friday morning. Nothing was going on. It was, we don't like to use the word quiet, but it was quiet. And this thought just ran through my head, and it was the plot line. It was the what they call the log line, or the hook for what became my debut novel. And instead of ignoring it, I said, all right, how do we develop this idea into a full story? And I mean, we can get to that. It's that log line in a second. We'll kind of tease it a little bit, I guess. But I decided to take it because it was going to be a mystery. I had been watching and listening to a lot of true crime stuff at the time, so it kind of had that tinge to it, that little bit of tint to it of that. And so I was like, well, let me take it from the law enforcement point of view. Let me use what I know. I know law enforcement. I know the procedures. I know how to operate here in New York. I know how things are here. Let me take this idea and, kind of put my lens on it. And the first book came out about a year ago. So it took me about 2.5 years to write it. And it was kind of where it began.
Dude, so I had a couple questions I wrote down there while you were going. Is your up until a certain point, your influence is everything but law enforcement, right? You're a writer, you're all those things. I worked with guys like you that had that ability, and I probably overlooked it because the rest of us we're gun toting, we're going to go get the bad guy type. And so a lot of that a lot of that just kind of went in over our heads about what we were doing type thing. But where did your influence to get you into law enforcement come from?
So I got out of college in 2004. I had that 4-year college degree, so I was going to set the world on fire. And I got married right away. I had been with my wife. We're high school sweethearts, and I figured, hey, what better time than now to get married? She was actually going to graduate school in California. She's a year older than I am. So she's out in California. We get married. We move to California. I figure, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get a job. The world's my oyster. They said, get that college, get that 4-year degree. You're going to go places. So I went out there and I proceeded to get a $10 an hour job living in LA. And, $10 an hour isn't a lot now. It was nothing now. I mean, back then it was still very difficult. So I needed to find a career. I didn't need just a job. I needed a career. And we lived right between Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Boulevard, kind of far down, a little bit down from where, the famous areas and the strips and all that stuff and the Walk of Fame. But over Hollywood Boulevard, when I drove down it every day, there was a banner that said, join the LAPD. And I think the starting salary at the time was in the 50,000s. I was like, oh, that's a lot of money. So I started looking into it and I started processing. And LA is kind of like any big city where they just kind of constantly are recruiting. They're constantly, you can take the entry test like, every other Saturday. And then, you kind of go through it at your own pace. And then as started going through it, I started kind of looking into law enforcement and what did it entail. So I got a great book called Blue Blood. It's by it highlights the NYPD, but it's written by a Harvard educated guy who basically goes through the beginning part of his career from about 1995 to a time right after 9/11, and it fascinated me. Both, like, he was looking into history of things, he was looking into the pop culture of things, looking at, who Serpico really was versus what they put in the movies, and then kind of going over his career and the things that he was doing and different opportunities he had. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is the job I want. So we lasted in LA, or I lasted in LA about a year. I was partway through the process, but then we moved back to New York, and I decided to kind of change directions. And I started looking into how to get involved in police work in New York. New York, everything is a civil service test, and they're given like once a year or once every 3 years. So the process is a lot slower. So I wound up state corrections, and I did that for about 2 years before I took the county test where I work now. And I've been with the sheriff's office for the last 17 years.
But you are originally from New York? Did I catch it right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm originally from New York, the upstate part near the city of Albany.
And then, so you had the ability, so you got your schooling done, all that other stuff, and then back, and I may have missed this, dude, because I was looking up Blue Bloods. Did you get hired at LAPD?
No, I did not get hired. I was probably, I would say, 3/4 of the way through the process. I had done a polygraph. I had a background investigator. All that stuff was happening, and I'm trying to get all the documents from New York sent out to me, because again, this is 2005, and we didn't have email attachments and things like that like we do now. So I was trying to get family back in New York to kind of pull documents together and send them out so that I had all that, and try to remember addresses. It was a very different process back then than what it is now. But no, I ended up dropping out of the LAPD process about 3/4 of the way through.
Glad you did that. You happy?
I think everything's worked out for the best.
Yeah. I think that's what we learn in time. You may have been frustrated and all the things or what have you, but I think ultimately we end up where we're supposed to be.
I agree.
I don't have any qualms about that. You got me interested in that Blue Bloods. It looks like they made it into a TV show. I did a lot of policing over the years, dude, and I had never heard of that book. And I appreciate you introducing me to that. I'm going to check that out. I'll check that out a little more. It looks like Tom Selleck they made like a TV drama.
Actually, those are two different things. Blue Bloods is a television show. It has Tom Selleck. I've heard good things. I've never actually watched it. Blue Blood is a book by the person's name is Edward Conlon, Conlon. Fabulous book. I've owned actually multiple copies of it because I reread it so frequently that I broke it. I lost the cover at a certain time. And then I work north of New York City, but so we're close enough so that a lot of guys are starting to transfer up to us. Yeah. And there was one young man I got to know really well, and he had been very deep into what they call the big job down there. And I actually bought that book for him for Christmas. I said, "Hey, you should check this out," because he had a family history working in the LAPD, the NYPD, and I thought he would be interested in the history and all these different things. And it's a fabulous book. It touches so many different aspects.
Now, so when I was just working my way through, I found I never read a lot as a kid, so that I'm opposite. That's what I was like. So college was not my thing. The first book I read was probably my aunt used to help me do my book reports when I was a kid, so I skated. The other joke I probably add to that is I graduated with a diploma, but I skated probably for 2 years worth of that diploma. So, but I was always good with people, and then resourceful enough to note. So a lot of Donnie Brasco and one of the best books I read when I did a lot of plainclothes stuff. I did task force work and undercover work, and one of the best books I read that kind of coattails off of that one was The Dummy's Guide to Mafia. And it was like it broke down, so it helped me learn structure in criminal organizations and all that stuff like that. And then it took me into just other books, and a lot of them were New York based, just because there's so much going on there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then Jerry, I think his name was, he's a New York or a New Jersey police chief that did a bunch of drug work. Jerry Spivey or something like that.
Okay.
He's old. You're going back into the early 2000s with some of these names that he was he had wrote a book about his time doing drug work. So I've been absolutely picking them up. Now, what I was going to ask you though, did you bring in with your books, did you bring in the creativity of your true life and reality, or did you pull everything out of just fiction world?
So the plot and everything behind it is fictional. It's not based
Yeah.
on any personal experience. What I brought were the people. I wanted the all the characters, but specifically the police officer characters, to feel as real as possible. I didn't want to go rely on a trope. Yeah, he's the grizzled old veteran who drinks every night and has a terrible relationship with his wife. I wanted to be based on people I knew. And yeah, obviously some people kind of, fit into those.
The grizzly old guy who drinks every night.
Yeah, some of them are, but he's also a human. There's a reason behind
right.
that. And, or just a lot of it was just the way we interact in public safety in general, and kind of that, a little bit of that dark humor, but just the, how do you trust the new guy? I have my protagonist, my main guy is named Mike, and he's a rookie. He's brand new. His dad was the police chief. His dad's deceased, before the actions of the book. But so he's living in his father's shadow, working for the same department his dad was the boss at, and he was beloved by everybody. And now, how does that guy fit into that? And how do we do that as public safety professionals, as police officers, or in a fire department? How do we bring people into that? And we bust their balls, like you make it difficult, because you need to know that you can trust that guy when things kind of go sideways. And the best way you can do that is give them stress and give them different ways of give yourself different ways of testing them. And that's kind of what I wanted to kind of portray in that. And everyone keeps asking me, "Oh, are you the rookie?" I'm like, "No," I said, but it's based on some of my experiences when I was new. But we have, at this point, I'm not the oldest guy, but I'm getting up to be one of the older guys in my agency. And I have these damn kids that are, 10 or 15 years younger than me now, or more. I think we hired our first deputy who was born after September 11th, which
Really?
which
Let's
is just
check out.
wild,
Holy crap.
which is just wild. Cause
Yes.
So, but I watch them come in, and I see how the guys I started with are treating some of these younger guys. And it's the same thing. It's the same way we were brought along. And it's kind of like this cyclical thing of, I was the new guy once, but now I'm the veteran, and I need to see how that goes. I'm a commissioned officer now. So, I actually have to be responsible. I can't bust chops like some of the guys, I have to have some, there has to be some kind of honor to that, some kind of looking up to that. So I can't do what everyone else is doing. But I wanted to kind of portray that, what it's like to be inside a police agency, not just rely on the tropes. And, I have that first line experience. I have something to actually write about now. And that's kind of what I wanted to put in there.
No, dude, I think it's cool because it gives I've read, and I think if you hear me a lot of times, I love taking advice from folks who kind of walked in a path. I'm not big on, even when I was in police work, is when we would go to train, if someone was teaching me that had not, um, didn't have kind of the street cred to get up and talk to me or walk me through hey, this is how we're going to do this scenario. And when I raise my hand and go, well, how did it play out with you? And they go, I don't know. I never got to do it. I go, well, give me somebody who's been there, done. I think that's where you have that moral authority to where you can and be able to speak to the inner workings and the culture and all the things that, and like you said, is the mentoring of the young folks that are coming through, and the young after 9/11. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I could see that being like your how all of this all of your skill set starts to merge here, just based on like you were going to be an attorney, you were going to be a writer, all the stuff that you postponed to go do 20 years of law enforcement comes to life because you decided. And I think that's what I wanted two is sometimes I work with police officers who are maybe getting ready to transition from work, and one of the things you'll see police officers do is their purpose and their identity is wrapped up in their job, their uniform, and I totally get that because it gives you such self-worth. But when that one of the guys I'd asked, he goes, "Hey, I want to work with you as I transition out." And I'm like, "Yeah, no problem." I said, "Are you planning on burning the boat, or do you want to go back and work part time?" He's like, "I want to burn the boat." And within a few weeks, he was back working part time as a bailiff. Because, and I'm not mad, right? I'm
Oh
not,
yeah,
but
absolutely
I
not.
understand. It's like, oh, you want to burn the boat, but here's why I think, Rodney, and I think this is why, like, you have this ability to take all this life experience over here and repurpose it into this new thing, and to do that. And that's one of the things I really wanted to put out there for law enforcement, for whatever is you may public safety in general, but this is for everybody
Yeah.
as you're moving into your next phase of life, or in your cases, the last thing I would want you to do is retire and be like, I feel like my whole identity and you and your wife is you're fighting because you're not a cop anymore. And every time you go somewhere, you're still in cop mode or whatever. I really appreciate the fact that you have this thing that you can go to and it gives you purpose. And I look at your social and you're the book guy, right? You're come meet you and you're doing signings and all that stuff. Man, it's just really cool to watch you evolve and take this. The other thing I wanted to point out for everyone is um, coaching small business is I'll have someone come in and they want to start a small business, and I'll be like, yeah, let's do this. We'll create a plan that's based on their transition out of their full time. So the point being is, hey, let's get this to this X of profit, and once we get here, let's see if we can scale back your full. We can start scaling back your full time and keep scaling where you are. You're already kind of doing that, dude. So I wanted to like really point all those things out for our audience about the transition you're making towards your retirement. And it's not retirement, dude. You're just moving on to another new gig.
Well, I think that's the thing, and I obviously did not plan for this to happen. It was kind of like I said, I got the idea. I needed to write it. It was kind of a personal thing. Needed to write it. I had to teach myself how to write again because while I had all this background in training, I didn't know. Um, Again, I think it was law enforcement. Like everything you do in law enforcement when you train, there's a procedure to it. There's a best practice to it. There's a way of doing it because there's people who have done it before. And I think I had a different mindset when I was younger. I was like, well, I know everything, so I'm just going to do this. And I was a big American literature person. I liked Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and all these like very very high level literary people. I was like, I'm just going to be them, and I'm just going to copy what they do, and I'm going to do that. And I didn't have any success because life experience, but I also didn't know how to write like them. It was all theory and it was all this other stuff. So when I had this idea and I decided that I was going to break out of trying to be a book snob like I was going to write a genre. I was going to write a mystery because that's what the idea was. I need to learn how to write a book. And so I went to, and again, we have so many more resources nowadays in the world. There are podcasts and there are YouTube videos. And so I just basically went out, I found all these different things and I kind of picked out what, like you said, that person who's walked before you. I worked in publishing, and this is what I found in my experience. And these are the things publishers are looking for. Or talking to other writers, and they say, well, this is how this works. There's this job called being a book coach, and there's a lot of these book coaches have podcasts. And there was a particular one that explained this process. It's plotting device called Save the Cat, and which is a book, and it's basically how movies are plotted.
Yeah.
And in the what this podcast host did in her show was she took the Hunger Games movies, which I had seen, and she used the Save the Cat method and outlined each act of the story doing the Hunger Games. So I'm like, well, I know that story. I've seen those movies, and I'm following along, and I'm like, I get it. It clicked for me. So then, in the writing world, you're either a plotter or you're a pantser. You plan a lot of it out. You pre-plan before you even start writing. You know where you're going. You know how to get there. All this stuff. And then a pantser is a guy or a girl just sits down and says, I'm going to write and take it where it takes me. And I'm a little bit of both now, as I've kind of, I'm in the middle of my third book now. So I'm kind of a little bit of both. But once I had this plotting way of looking at it and it broke it down and it made it procedural and it made it clear like that totally unlocked it for me.
Yeah. I just posted for folks, if you're checking the comments, is I put the Amazon the book we were talking about. Rodney stuff is in there. I put the Blue Blood book link in there, and then Save the Cat's got its own website as well. So I just put that in there so everybody can see that, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. I get stuck in tradecraft of the job I used to do. So what I did was I wrote a couple chapters from a fictional standpoint of just whatever. And something I did, Rodney, and for folks is I've got it laid out and I play with it, but I did a comic book. I
Cool.
did mine broke down as more as a in a comic book type fashion. Growing up, and my inspiration was kind of me. Was growing up was um, yeah, a little adverse childhood, but I had comic books where I didn't read these big books like you did, and the influences of Hemingway and all those things. Mine was G.I. Joe, right? So
Yep.
so when I was really trying to find some inspiration, I got them all from my aunt's house. So they sat over here on the shelf, and I'm redoing my basement. I'm gonna put some of them up, but like I went through, and what I got to thinking about, the hero of the story is that me being that little kid is, there might be a little kid out there that can relate to my journey through comic books, and just the whole thing is finding an escape from maybe where they were dealing with, and help them with their imagination and dreaming big too. So the reason that leans in hard was, when I was in sixth grade, I told my teacher, like career day, I told my teacher I was going to be an undercover cop. Like, I was like, my advice was on the TV, all the things. So I was like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. For career day, I dressed up like Don Johnson, and I rolled in my advice style. So I had set my path on where I was headed a long time ago. So I wanted to point that out. Is you get to, folks, if you decide you want to follow Rodney's path and you want to jump into telling your story, especially if you're in law enforcement, you have all these amazing stories. You got some things here, but it doesn't have to be. You can decide. It can be fiction, nonfiction. You can do it as storyboard or comic book or whatever it might be. I just wanted to throw that other option out there that I was working on, dude. It's good, man.
Well, and again, there's so many great memoirs, which Blue Blood is kind of a little bit more of a memoir. He's kind of retelling his career path as well as the history and stuff. But memoir is a great way. I'm considering doing that myself. I mean, you take anyone in law enforcement or public safety, you serve for your period of time, and you kind of represent a generation. So my 20 years, I started in I started as a state correction officer in July of 2006. So since 2006, I do actually do a presentation on this. I did an author talk a couple weeks ago, but I've served under 4 different presidents, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, both Trump terms, and Joe Biden. I've had 4 different governors in New York State. I've had, a plethora of things. Yeah, it was, I was within 5 years of 9/11, but also, I'm I was working for Ferguson, Missouri, and for George Floyd, and for Trayvon Martin, and for the Texas shootings, and all the threat of the targeted violence that's going on now, all the political stuff. I've been there in law enforcement for that entire time, and it's interesting to watch how your career develops and changes during that, the rules that change. And obviously it's great for someone in my generation to look back and look at somebody who started maybe 1990 and, either is still on a job or, retired within the last couple of years, and watch how the job changed for them, and, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Everything that happens out in the rest of the country affects how things happen even locally. I work for a sheriff's office. I work, you're not small, but we're not a giant city municipal agency where, everybody knows everybody. You walk in and you say hi to everybody. It's not like, who's that guy? It's small enough to know everybody's first name, and it's amazing to see that. So anyone out there who's serving now, or who's who's retired in the last couple of years, that has, like you said, the stories, but it's interesting to put it in context of what's going on in the bigger world, or the bigger country, or even the bigger things of your regional area.
You are spot on. 98. Been in the work since 89. 911 dispatcher starting in 92. And then all the way through. In 98, when I went to the police academy, the most impactful thing, there was two things that had impacted police training, both of them from LA. O.J. Simpson, the civil trial, domestic violence laws in Virginia changed to where it took away the officer's ability to warn. You had to arrest if you could, once you identified a primary aggressor. There was no, you had to take somebody out of the home that night. It used to be like, hey, you go stay at grandma's house, you stay at mom's house,
Yep.
y'all, everybody get separate, y'all get better tomorrow. It went to that. And then the other one was use of force continuum from Rodney King.
Yep.
And both of those were, I just remember those playing big roles. And so when you say that national scale type stuff, it affects, it came all the way into Virginia law enforcement, where I'm based out of too.
Yep.
So, and the other thing I would like to tell, like, here's my thing when it comes to creativity. When I sit down with someone like you and we start telling stories, I'm like, hey, somebody get a recorder and record this. They're like, why don't we record this? I go, this is our book material, because it's hard
Yep.
for me to sit down and type it. But when we sit down and you go, all right, tell me about that first call, or tell me, you ever get to work any homicides? You're like, oh, I had a good one. And it happened to me the other night with some friends that had, we were telling, they were listening, I was telling stories, and that's kind of how it goes sometimes.
Yep.
But one, they got me going. They said, one of them asked me about being in court or something other, and I go, oh, I said, I got to be in court when the judge handed down a death sentence. And I said, and where I had to stand was I stood behind the defendant. And I said, I was on the way the judge's bench was, the defendant and me. When I looked at the judge, it was like he was talking to me.
Oh.
And I said, I was standing there all professional, but when the judge said, I have no choice but to sentence you to, I hereby sentence you to death, well, on such and such date, with the Virginia, like he had this canned statement he read. Holy crap, man. I was standing there and I was like, dang, he could be talking to me, dog. But it was a
Wow.
moment that it's funny, right? It's a moment
Yeah.
that, like, I remember it
Yep.
in detail. And so when it takes someone like you or someone else to get me going, because if you ask me on spur of the moment, I was so removed from the job and then doing undercover work, we just didn't talk. Like you just don't tell your business. We just always been.
Yeah.
So it takes a minute in the right room to get going. So I wanted to point that out for folks too, is let your creativity come to life and
Yeah.
what it needs to for you. Some people like to write it, journal it, talk about it, record it, but don't miss that opportunity to put some of those stories down. I'll tell you what I'm working on. I got a couple old school, some old buddies that were investigators, and that case that I just told you about. We're all those guys are all retired, but I texted a couple of them after I had told the story, and I was like, "Hey, let's do a podcast episode on this murder," because everybody's most all the parties, or like the bad guy's dead.
Yep.
He spent the least amount of time on death row in Virginia history because he was ready to go, and then he had very little family, so there's not a lot of moving parts with that. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to debrief some cases with some old friends too. That's the other angle I
That'd
was
be
going to
cool.
tell folks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Tell
just,
me,
you go ahead, Jeff.
No, you go ahead, brother. What was you going?
I was just going to say, it's funny when you get in a certain company, you have certain stories with certain individuals, because like any career, people kind of go in and out of your career. You're rookie for a little bit, so you kind of have those academy days and those first days. I made investigator pretty early on, so I have a lot of memories from that. I became a supervisor before I had 10 years on, and a ton of learning and a ton of experiences with different squads there. And now, like I said, moving into commission officer, now I'm you kind of see how the sausage is made a little bit more as an administrator. And it's really interesting to kind of take that lens and say, you know, well, where was I at, and talk to the people you have those memories with or those experiences with, and reminisce. It's really
Yeah.
cool. So I just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, it just, you know, and it's almost like you're back there, and certain things be so crystal clear. You're like, wow. And a lot of people actually ask me, like, how do you remember that? I'm like, I don't know, but why don't you?
Yeah, that's right. I'm blessed with a good memory, but I had kids late in life. Now, sometimes now when the guys will call, like I have one of my old task force partners, he'll call me and start hitting me with very like tag numbers. He's hit me with a tag number one time, and I was like, hold on a second, give me a minute, and it took me a little bit, but I ended up telling him, I was like, all right, we were right here, and he's like, dang, I knew you'd remember that, but he would. I'm getting to where I can't recall, to the point of where I told someone the other day, there's a handful of cold cases that I was involved in that loosely, most of my stuff I got solved. There's a couple that was out there that I helped with, and I shared with someone the other day. I would really like to go back in and read the case file. So it's
Mm,
like I would like to just go in and sit down and look at because I don't have any of the old notes. You know, that whatever's attached is attached to the case file now, and it's all digital. But I would like to go through and just kind of scroll the things and the moving pieces to help it stay top of mind, because I feel I'd like to, in my lifetime, I'd like to see some of those old cold cases get
yeah.
solved
Hmm.
through whatever means, right? So I have that on the back of my mind, and then the other part is the kids. They steal away part. You know, it's just I get occupied in other areas. So I understand why my friends don't remember some of the stuff that I do, just because now I've got a ton more going on. So
Yep.
if somebody asked me like a couple of weeks ago, they were hitting me with something. They were like, "Well, tell me this," and I go, "All right, just walk with me for a second. Keep telling me about it." And I said, "Tell me." And then they were going on and they shared names. I'm like, "Oh, what time of year was it?" And they kept going. And I was like, "Oh, hold on. All right, hang on here. All right, this is what happened." But I just had to get them to get me going and just give
Yep.
me a couple of the key people. I'm like, "Who is this?" And all right, hold on. I can generally go back I can go back in time and really relive those moments, just
Yeah.
because they're like you said. Well, I want you to remember.
Yeah.
There's been a couple times when there's been some memories that I was just that were irrelevant, that someone's like, well, you should remember this. And I go, I don't, I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain to you. There was some, I had, I had, I had gave an officer a report one time, and I don't remember giving that officer the report. And that officer ended up in in kind of the wrong hands, being used the wrong way. So they came back looking for me, like, "Hey, how'd this guy get his report?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And they're like, "Well, you gave it to him." And I go, "Where's your receipt?" And like I
Yeah.
didn't get a receipt for it or what have you, but it was. I just don't remember giving that guy the report. And they told me I have. And I'm like, all right, well, that's fine. If that's the case, but Joe Jeffrey just don't remember
Yeah.
doing it. Years later, I sat down and was talking with different people, and they were like plugging in the facts I didn't know. And I was like, well, hold on here. I think and I start recalling, like, all right, wait a minute, this was this, but we had so much going on that little trivial thing, and then plus, you know. It didn't affect me at the time. It didn't affect me positively or negatively, so I didn't have keep it close to mind like you do sometimes. So there have
Right.
been some cases where I've been tuned out on it. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
Tell me, your dad passed away, and that has had a big impact on you. Couple about 3 years ago or so. That also had a huge impact on what you're doing and where you're headed. Tell me, how did that moment really help change you and help you kind of get your creative goals going?
So, first, my mother passed away in 2016. It was
Mm.
kind of a weird transition period in my life at that point. Um, and it kind of changed my relationship with my dad after that, because my mom always took care of him. And it was really interesting when we were talking to the priest for her services. We always just talked about how my mom took care of everything. She was, you never had to worry because my mom was going to take care of it. And now we were all, we were all on our own. Yeah, I'd been married at that point for 12 years, and my sister had just gotten married, and she was, kind of moving on with her life. But now my dad was kind of going to be alone, and so everyone kind of worried about him for a while. And he had been ill. You talk about losing your identity. He worked in construction. He was a welder, a pipe fitter. I mean, the man knew how to build anything. Like you could explain it to him, be like, all right, I think I got this, and he'd be able to do it. We built a workbench in my garage. I still have the plans that he drew up, trying to figure out what we needed. And then he got ill. He had a number of different health things. He wasn't able to work anymore. He wasn't able to basically see any of his buddies anymore. He was and then with COVID, he was pretty much locked up. He had a lung infection, so COVID was going to be really, really bad for him. Basically, they said, you get it, you're dead. So 2022 rolls around, and basically he passed somewhere between Saturday afternoon and Monday morning when my brother-in-law found him. We don't know when, because he was kind of reclusive too. He only talked to you when he wanted to. And I remember my daughter had just started running track, and I had texted my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, my sister, and my dad, and I posted a video of my daughter running around the track for the first time. And last thing he ever said was, "Oh, good for you." My daughter's name, that's a great sport. And that was the last thing I ever heard from him. They tried to reach him on Sunday. My sister, he was living in an apartment that my brother-in-law and my sister owned, and she had actually stopped by with the kids sometime on Sunday, but he didn't answer the door, so she's like, the heck with it, and just left. And it got to the point where it was like, what's going on? And finally, my brother-in-law let himself in, and he found him. He had passed away. So, but then immediately the cop thing pops in my head, because my sister's hysterical. I'm like, all right, this is what's going to happen. It's unintended. I said, the police officers are going to do this and they're going to do that. And so I went through the whole process, because that's the first thing that popped into my head. I wanted to explain to my sister what was going to happen to alleviate her concerns and her fears, because I was so, I wanted to make her feel more comfortable. So that was, we got through that. I ended up taking some time off. We get bereavement time around things like that. So I used it to basically clean out my dad's apartment, and I'm going through and I'm finding memories and things. And it kind of like felt like I got really into his head a little bit, and the things that were on his mind, in his, basically, I said, in his seclusion. He was trapped inside his house. So that was in April. It was right before Easter in 2022. And then a month later is when this idea popped through my head. And I wasn't quite 40 years old yet, and I had lost both my parents, and I had wanted to be a writer my entire life, and I wanted to write. And I said, I'm not going to let this go. I'm not going to wait for the time to be right. I need to do this now. And that's when I said, I kind of got into, training myself to learn how to do this. So the first book, Our Lady of the Overlook, I dedicated to my mom, because we used to try to write mysteries when I was a little kid. Like, I used to love whodunits, the movie Clue, or Agatha Christie, any of those books. I used to love whodunits. So I was like, Mom, we should write a mystery. And she'd come in and we kind of like outline it a little bit, but we never did anything. So the dedication of my first book was, Mom, I finally finished a mystery. And the second book, which came out in the end of August, that one's called Quiet Whispers of the Overlook. It's the second book in the trilogy. I dedicated it to Dad. I just said, this one's for you. So there's a lot of that family history is also kind of put in there also, on top of my lens as a police officer.
Dude, that's a really, that's powerful stuff, dude. like that's an amazing inspiration that falls on absolutely one of the darkest times, but it's propelled you. It's that rubber band effect that has propelled you forward, and that's um, it's really from the stranger guy who's sitting over here meeting you this first time. It's really cool to hear you take that setback and apply it the way that you have with that inspiration and motivation to get your stuff done.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the timing was just right. Like you said, I think earlier, it was just, things kind of work out the way they're going to work out. You're meant to be where you're meant to be. And that all came together at that time for me. So, I'm not going to waste what I have, any longer. And, yeah, listen, I've got years and years to go. I don't want to lose, the current memories I have and things like that. But also, you know, this is what I wanted to be when I grew up. And now I get to actually hopefully live that out, And again, you talked about the small business stuff. I'm just trying to set that platform up now so that I can spin that off after I'm done with law enforcement, or if law enforcement is done with me and I have something else to do.
you sometimes when you're getting those situations too, just that life's intuition puts the right people in your life with the right conversations, the right thing, the right motives. I try to preach to people like when something bad's happening is make sure to stop, pause, take a look at what lesson you're trying to learn, and then when something's good or bad, pay attention to who's coming or going and where those nudges are coming from, and it'll really help set you on the right path from someone who was off the path. I was kind of I had one foot in the ditch line is what kind of walking on the road and stumbling through the trash in the ditch, you would say at times in my life. And once I figured that out of paying attention to those, but man, that is it's a powerful exclamation point to put on this really cool story of your career and your writing and all the things that you've done. What what would you like? You want folks to buy your books? What are you thinking? You want them to connect with you? How do you want to wrap us up, Rodney?
So, a couple things. I mean, I noticed a couple times pop on the screen you had links to my website and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're interested in mysteries, you're interested in procedural stuff, my stuff's right up your alley. I don't try to sell hard the book. I just try to tell people what I'm all about. And if you want to buy the book, buy the book. So it's available. But
Buy the book. Buy the book. You
if
some New
you
Yorker
do,
in me. Buy the book.
if you do, you don't. I don't. Everybody at my job knows I'm a writer now. Everybody knows I have books, and some people seek me out. Like I had a guy I worked with for years to talk about coming back part time. I never thought this guy would come back part time, but he did. So he stops by my office because I'm a big administrator now. I got an office. So he walks by my office this morning and he goes, "Oh, hey, I wanted to get a copy of your book." I was like, "All right." I said, "Well, I don't have anything with me." He goes, "All right, no problem." He gives me the money for the book. And he goes, I'll catch you, I'll catch you next week. Like I didn't beg him, didn't ask him, none. He sought me out, and I find, I don't need to hard sell anything. If you're interested in it, I'll tell you about it. If you're interested, make the purchase. If you don't, that's cool. And not everybody's a reader. And there's plenty of people I talk to. They're like, "Hey, that's really cool, man. I don't read books." So I was like, "All right, cool. No problem." So I guess what I'll end with, because I primed it earlier, was what this idea was that popped through my head that kind of led me down
Please.
this entire thing. So the idea that popped in my head as this log line, as this kind of this dramatic question was, what if you grew up as an adopted family, knew you were adopted, you kind of grew up that way your whole life, but as an adult, you wanted to go look for your biological family. You want to do one of those DNA tests. So this is where the true crime kind of stuff comes in. And, instead of finding out like, your uncle was a serial killer or something like that, you find out instead that your mother, your birth mother, was an unidentified cold case homicide victim from 40 years before. What would you do? And so that's what kind of spurred the last 3.5 years. That's what kind of spurred that on. And it's taken a lot of evolution from that idea. I mean, that's still the at the very core, but there's so much world building and things that go on top of it now. But that was the very core. I was like, how do you reconcile that? So that was the question that came to me at 2:00 in the morning, on a Friday, early Friday morning in May 2022.
That should pique enough curiosity to go read the book.
Well,
I will tell you, dude, that I have me and one of my close friends. We talk about adults who passed through some kind of homicide, or bad actions, and they had kids. And we and him, when we're talking, we'll be like, wonder, the kids thing will come up because I know how I am in my pursuit of the truth. So I get that. That's a lot of curiosity, man. That's a
yeah.
really great way to approach it too, dude.
So
Too
yeah,
cool, man. Folks, make sure you check out Rodney. His website, everything's in the show notes. It's easy to find. Um, Rodney's website is exactly who he is and what he does. RL Carpenter writing or writer.com. It's in the show notes. I'll make sure we bookmark that in all the places you can find and connect with him, man. It's really cool the approach you took. I think when you get into why you should read his book, what I would tell you is the part he mentioned about the procedural stuff of cop work. It matters, and I think it helps it makes help a imperfect story sometimes. If we get that part of it right, it really helps you understand that it's on the cop side and the judicial side. I think those are important factors that really help support it, and it's coming from someone who walks that path every day. So that's that moral authority that you have that no one else can take away from you, and a ghostwriter can't. You can tell them all day long, but they don't have your experience. So man,
right.
that's a really great way that you approach it. But you are absolutely welcome, and I hope you take up the opportunity to come back and talk cops and robbers with old Jeff anytime you want
Absolutely.
to, man. Um, I'd love to. I'd love to shoot the breeze with you on some old cases or
Sure.
anything along those lines. It's always stuff that me and some of the cop guys will come back on and we'll break down. I got some in. If I have victims. I have former offenders. I have folks that are recovering addicts, and one of my new close guests and friends that I've made, John Wildsmith. He comes on with me once a week now, and we just go through different things. So you're absolutely welcome to continue these
I appreciate
conversations
that,
with